I'm going to try to share my screen now. Take us into, whoops, where'd we go? Where did we go? All right, that didn't work well. Hang on.
Christine, should I be having push the record button? I did.
Yeah,
Do I get any kind of indication that it's on?
in the upper left-hand corner of the screen, it'll say recording.
Mine does say that.
Okay.
Can anybody, is Sherry still there? This should be,
Okay.
I am here. It says you are viewing Dennis O'Leary's screen. Dennis O'Leary has started screen sharing.
does anybody see it?
No,
It's a black screen. You might want to, Dennis, you might want to stop screen sharing
All right,
and restart it with, make sure that you choose what you want to screen share. And just so everyone knows, we have muted everyone so that Dennis can do his talk, and then there'll be questions afterwards, so that there's no ambient noise in the background. Oh, there you go.
there we
Beautiful.
go.
yes, wonderful.
All right, that's better. Okay, thousands of years ago, when people looked up at the sky, they saw these things up there, these little white dots. And no one really knew what they were, but since they didn't have video games or TV, they took a notice of what was going on in the night sky from the beginning of the night to the end of the night and from one season to another. And they noticed certain things. The stars seem to stay, we call them stars. They seem to stay in fixed patterns, and they would move across the sky in the same way that the sun moves across the sky in the daytime, okay, from east to west. And they also noticed that during different seasons, the same patterns of stars would come up again. So they could tell as a star or a group of stars started to rise in the east early in the evening, they could tell that the floods were coming soon. They had to harvest the crops, or they could tell that the winter was coming and they had to hunker down and put provisions in. So they used the stars originally as kind of a calendar to keep them going. Another thing that they noticed was that the stars in the sky right toward this top part here, they all moved, but this one star right here, can you see my cursor? This star here didn't move in the sky. This stayed the same every time. All these other stars would move around it, and all those other stars in the background would move, but this one star stayed where it is. Native Americans called it the home star, because if you could find that star, you could find your way home. If you're walking toward it, we call it the North Star. So if you're walking toward it, you're walking north. If you're walking away from it or your back is to it, you're walking south. If your right shoulder is pointed to it, you're walking east. And if your left shoulder is pointed to it, you're walking west. So they could tell their patterns or where they were in the world by just following that one star. Now, as time went by, people kind of identified these patterns, and we call them today constellations. And they kind of drew like dot to dots And that helped them visualize these things. And they would make up stories about how they got into the sky and things like that for the children. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to put the constellations together. Well, before I do that, we're talking about Hershey's Mill. We have a big dome of light pollution around us. If you were in Montana, you might see that many stars. We're not there. And if we had the eyes that we had when we were 10 years old, maybe we'd see some stars. But for now, I'm going to reduce the number of stars down to what we would be expecting to see in Hershey's Mill about now. Okay, so quite a difference. Now I'm going to put those constellations back up in the sky. All right. And again, here's that one star that doesn't move in the sky, the North Star. That NCP is the North Celestial Pole. The pole is actually not at the star. It's a little bit off the star. And the reason that that star doesn't move is because the North Pole of the Earth is pointed at it, or actually pointed at the North Celestial Pole. So when the Earth spins around on its axis, giving us day and night, the stars at night seem to move around in that circular pattern, but that one star stays the same. Okay. Now, we've also identified some of these constellations with, over here we have one of the things that you would probably be able to recognize, and that's this group of stars here. This is what we call the Big Dipper. Now, the Big Dipper is part of a larger constellation called Ursa Major, or the Great Bear. Now, I'm going to put that in. The Big Dipper, since it's only part of the big constellation, is called an asterism. Okay, so I'm going to put some of those up just so you'll see a little bit about what I'm talking about there. Okay. The Little Dipper over here, okay, is the bottom part of the constellation Ursa Minor, or the Little Bear, and the tail of the bear is where the North Pole is, the North Star is located. To find it in the sky, the simplest way is to use these two pointer stars here to point toward the North Star. Okay, we're doing a little bit of navigation here, but this is how things get started. We are now tuned in to Hershey's Mill, because that's the coordinates that I put in already, tonight at 9:30. Now, if you can go out at 9:30 and it's darkish out and there aren't any clouds, these are the stars that you would be able to spot in the sky. The lines you would have to draw yourself. Now, following up on the Big Dipper, all of these things are visible objects that you can see with your naked eye, okay? These are stars and different constellations. Now, you'll probably not see all of the stars in all of these constellations, but the major ones you would be able to see. Going back to navigation again, we would use the handle of the Big Dipper. We would follow the arc of the Dipper to the star Arcturus over here. It's a very bright star. It's a nearby star. It's only about 40 light years away. So the light that you see from that star tonight left there 40 years ago. Okay. And this is the constellation Bootes. Okay. And that forms a kite-like object in the sky. Now, remember, you're sitting down at home. You're not going to fall. but I'm going to move the sky a little bit. And again, the base of the pot of the Big Dipper will go right down to this star here. This is Regulus. This is the heart of the lion. This is Leo the lion, and his mane is like a backwards question mark or a sickle, okay? All of these you can see. Now, what I'm going to do now is move across the sky a little bit, and then we'll come back. And you'll see some of these others. Oops, here we are. Across from the sickle, we have Gemini. Castor and Pollux, the two major stars up there. Next to that, low in the horizon toward the west, we have Orion. Orion is a winter constellation, and it's on its way out. And when that leaves us, we're going to get a whole new set of stars coming up for the summer sky. We'll go back into all of these stars later, but I just want to give you a quick view of where we are with them. And then over next to Orion, we're going to have Mars right up here in the sky. Next to Orion, we have Taurus the Bull with his big horns and a bright red supergiant star, Aldebaran. And then over here, look at that, a comet. Who could tell? Well, my goodness, we'll look at that later. And over here, we have a very small group of stars that are very, very special. These are the Seven Sisters, or the Pleiades. And we'll see them close up later on. Across from the Big Dipper, and about the same distance from the North Star, we have Cassiopeia, a W or M-shaped constellation, easy to find in the sky. Native Americans called, as I said, the North Star the home star. And stars over in this vicinity of the sky and the stars in Cassiopeia were called the first man and the first woman. And it was their job. There were no other constellations in Indian lore or Native American lore that could cross into this area. It was sacred ground because the first man and the first woman had to keep the home fire burning so people would always be able to find their way home. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring up some deep sky objects. I bring these up because some of them you'll be able to see naked eye, some of them you'll be able to see with binoculars, and some you'll need at least a telescope for, even if it's a small one. Over by the Little Dipper, we have an open cluster of stars. Now, there are basically two designations that these have. NGC is a new general catalog of stars. There are about 10 different ways to identify objects in the sky. The primary ones that we're going to use tonight will be the NGC catalog, and we're going to use the M catalog. M stands for a comet hunter. His name was Charles Messier, and he was looking for comets in the 1750s. And back then, his telescope wasn't as good as the ones that we have today. So he would look at an object, and he knew it wasn't a star because it wasn't a pinpoint object, but he didn't know what it was. And it could be a comet. And the only way to tell was to go back the next night to the same location. And if it moved, then it would be a comet. Well, these things didn't move. And he kept finding them over and over again. And it just made him very frustrated. So we made a catalog of these things, which we look at today and say, he had to be crazy because these things are beautiful. Okay, but they weren't comets. So he was only interested in comets at the time. So here we have NGC 188, and this is, I'm gonna center this, and I'm gonna pull that up. This is a star cluster. It's an open cluster of stars that's very easy to find in the sky. It's a binocular object. You should be able to see it. I don't think you could see it naked eye, but it would be something that would be able to see. These open type clusters are stars that could have started out in the same area and just stayed together as a group, or they haven't aged long enough to expand away from each other just yet. So those are mostly what open clusters look like, but we will see some others later. Going back out, we're going to go over to, where am I here? Going to go over to, this is a Whirlpool Galaxy. This is M51. It's not listed there, but as you get to do this stuff, you get to know them. The Whirlpool Galaxy is a beautiful structure. Hubble took this picture for its 25th anniversary. This is a spiral galaxy here that's cannibalizing this smaller galaxy over here. The trail of dust and stars and gas that's being enveloped here because this has a greater gravity. And that's why it's being called the Whirlpool Galaxy. It's a beautiful sight to see in the sky. The Hubble picture of it is absolutely amazing. Let me see, over here we have M3. Now, I'm going to center it first. M3 is what's called a globular cluster. And globular clusters are spherical shaped collections of at least 100,000 stars. There's nothing in the middle to hold them together. And if a star, let's say a star out here on the outside, would get pulled in because of the gravity of the whole unit, and it gets to the middle, there's nothing there. So it keeps on going back out until gravity grabs it and starts pulling it back in again. And all these 100,000 stars are doing the same thing. It's an enormous object. And because of that, these stars really have plenty of room that they don't actually bump into each other, which is what you might expect. It's just an enormous object, and it's just one of my favorite things to see in the night sky. Probably the best globular cluster is over here. This is called the Keystone or the Hercules Cluster. Also, it's M13. And this is probably the most famous, and it's a very, very bright object. It may have up to 1 million stars in this. And if you have a large telescope, you can actually resolve some of the stars, or you can see individual stars in this thing. With binoculars, you can find it easily. And Hercules is a constellation that will be coming up more toward the summer. And it's very easy to find Hercules, and it's easy to find this particular object in it, just using binoculars. It's not likely you would see it with your naked eye at this time. Okay, I'm going to go up here. Over here by Leo, okay, we have a group of galaxies. Now, I'm going to just click on one over there, center it. This is called Markarian's chain. This is an enormous area where galaxies are all over the place. Each one of these white dots there is a galaxy. Some of them are circles, some of them are not. There are billions of stars in each one of these things. Some are spiral, some are elliptical, some are just other types. And so these are all over in this particular area. It just happens to be that these objects are in the sky in the same visual area that we can see them from here. All right. Those are objects that you would need a telescope to see, though. But this whole area, as you move along from one to the other, you're going to pick up galaxies, nebula. There's all kinds of things to see here. As it turns out, 100 years ago, we did not know that there were other galaxies. We thought the Milky Way was the only galaxy there were. That's why in I can bring it back over to the north, to the Big Dipper here for a second. Hang on, let's go. All right, and up here, where am I? And right over here. These three, Bode's Nebula, there's two here, and I'm gonna center those. And as you can see, these are galaxies. They were called nebula because at the time, nebula means cloud. And they saw these things with the telescopes of the day, not realizing that they were outside of our galaxy, and they just called them nebula. So as it turns out, we later discovered around 1926 or so that these things were outside of our galaxy and not nebula at all, but galaxies in their own right. All right, moving. Up here, there's Leo. This is a not so much a naked eye object, but it's a binocular object. This is called the Beehive Cluster. It's an open cluster of stars, and it looks like a big swarm of bees. They're all around this one whole area here, but it looks like they're all swarming, and that's why they call it the Beehive Cluster. Anytime you get the groups of stars together like that, they would be considered some sort of a cluster. And then we're getting into some areas here. Let's see. Orion over here was the great hunter, and when he was put up into the sky, the story goes that Orion was bragging that he was such a great hunter, he could kill any animal in the world. And the animals felt that he was going to kill all the animals in the world. So they sent a scorpion, and the scorpion was able to sting him. And when Orion died, the gods put him up into the sky. And because the scorpion was such a great, was able to kill the hunter, he was put up into the sky also, but he was put up into the summer sky. So when the scorpion starts to rise in the summer, Orion leaves the whole sky. But when Orion went up, since he was a hunter down here, and we have our horizon here, those trees in Hershey's Mill are killing me here. This is Lepus the rabbit, something for him to hunt. And over here we have the big dog, and this is called Sirius the Dog Star. And up here we have the little dog, oops, with a bright star called Procyon up here. And these things form, it's more of a hexagon, but they put a lot of stars in this particular rendering of it. But here are Castor and Pollux. Here's Procyon, Sirius. Down here we have Rigel, the foot of Orion. Over here we have Aldebaran, the eye of the bull in Taurus. And then up here we have Auriga, and this is Capella. That's another star up there. Now, this area here is filled with amazing things to see. And I'm going to try to show those to you right now. This is Orion. This is a bright star. It used to be brighter. It's called Betelgeuse. I've heard it translated two ways. One is the shoulder of the giant, and one that the kids at schools seem to enjoy more, the armpit of the giant. So pick whichever one you like. It is a red supergiant star. It's about to explode into a supernova, and that should happen anytime between tonight and 1,000,000 years from now. In the past 2 years, it started to dim. Really, no one knows why. There's some speculation about things going in front of it and so forth, but no one really knows why it's started to dim. But it's called for a lot of investigation, and so far, nothing has really panned out about it. For those of you who saw Men in Black, this here is Orion's belt. Okay, 3 stars, very prominent in the sky. Orion is probably the second easiest constellation to find in the winter sky after the Big Dipper. It's very prominent. This is a blue supergiant star. It's not going to explode anytime soon like the other one. And it's easy to spot in the sky. Over here, we're going to look at this particular star right now, and I'm going to center it and move in on it. And don't we find nebula? This cloudiness here is what we call nebulosity. This is called the Flame Nebula because it looks like there's flames coming up. Over here, if you stand on your head, you'd be able to see that this looks like a horse's head. So this is called the Horsehead Nebula. Kids in school think it's a dragon or a crocodile and things like that, but it's called the Horsehead Nebula, very famous in astronomy. But you can see nebulosity around all of these stars up here. And what that tells us is that these are new, freshly made stars. Anywhere where you see this darkness, that means that the gas and dust in this nebula have started to collapse. And when they start to collapse on themselves, pressure and heat builds up. And when it gets to a certain point, the star explodes and it ignites into a star is what happens. And it starts burning hydrogen fuel. And that's what our sun is doing right now. So this is newly formed stars. And you can see there's a lot of gas and dust all around here. This is just Orion's belt, simple to find in the sky. And what I'm going to do now is reduce it down a little bit and get down to the Orion Nebula. And that's over here. If you looked up at the sky, this would look like 3 stars. 1, 2, 3 in a row. And those are his scabbard or where his sword goes. And if you look up at it, with a telescope or even binoculars, this is naked eye. You could see this anytime in the winter when it's out. But you can see the nebulosity here, and the glowing that comes from it is because stars are being formed. There are actually thousands of stars being formed in these clouds right now. And the light that you see from it is the background from the stars that have already started to form. With a small binoculars, you can spot a couple of stars here. They're called the trapezium right in the middle. But with a telescope, you can see that there are many, many more. And using Hubble, you can see thousands of stars in this area up here, all newly made stars. Okay. This is we can look at this. This is a Witch Head Nebula. Where is it? Doesn't really look like a witch. Oops, come on. All right. This is about it. Somebody had a very odd way of looking at witches, but this would be her forehead, her eye socket, and her mouth, or something like that. And or it can be this mouth and her nose and her eyes or whatever. But they were not impressed with witches at the time, so this is what they came up with for the Witch Head Nebula. Going across from Orion, we come to this is Taurus the Bull, and we'll start right up at the top of Taurus, and here is Mars. Mars is the only planet that's currently visible in our night sky. If you get up early in the morning, you would be able to see Venus before the sun comes up, but Mars is the only one that we're able to see at night right now. As the summer comes along, we'll be able to see Jupiter again and Saturn again. And this is Mars. We have currently 2 rovers on Mars rolling around up there, and we have another instrument called InSight that's there studying the geology of Mars. And as everybody knows, there are plans to try to send people up there within a decade or so. I am not going. I'm not going. My wife would put my name in, but I took it out. So that's Mars. That's easy to find in the sky. Right after it starts to get dark, this would be the first object that would come up in the sky. And that's because the light that we see from Mars is reflected sunlight. So it takes about 10 minutes for light to reach us from Mars. These other stars are much further away, and the light would take them a much longer time to get through the light pollution that we have here. It's usually right after sunset. It's slightly dark. Mars can be seen. The others, it's still too bright to see them. Let's see. Down here we have the Hyades. This is a collection of stars, including Aldebaran, that is very easy to find in the sky. Nope, that's not what I want. This is easy to find in the sky because it's right next to Orion. And again, it's basically a big open cluster of stars. There are probably 100 stars in this area here. And it's just something, to look at and see. Everybody has kind of favorite stuff to see. I prefer globular clusters and planets. And Overall, one of my favorites things to see is the moon. Just a lot of detail up there that really something to see. Here we have the Pleiades or the Seven Sisters. Story goes that there were 7 sisters out in the field and they were picking berries, and one day a bear came by and the bear started chasing them through the field, and to get away from the bear they climbed a tree, and they climbed as far up as they thought it would be safe, but the bear started climbing after them. So they climbed all the way up to the top of the tree and the bear kept coming, so they held hands and they jumped out. And as they did that, the Great Spirit grabbed them and placed them up here where they'd be safe from the bear and they'd always be together. If you look up at this naked eye, you can see 6 and maybe 7 stars if you have your glasses on. If you look through binoculars, you can see probably a couple of dozen. And if you look with a telescope, you can see there are hundreds of stars in this area. And you see this nebulosity around them. These are all newly formed stars. At some point, they will kind of break away into their own areas. But for right now, it's a very close, compact group of newly formed stars. And again, even with binoculars, you could probably see some of this cloudiness or nebulosity. Okay. And moving a little further over here, what do we come upon but a comet, an actual comet? All right, center that. And as I get closer to it, it really doesn't change much. The thing about comets is that if you find one, it's named after you. So right now, this is named after a person named Boronson. We have them named after individuals like Shoemaker Levy. Those are great comet hunters. We have Halley's Comet, Comet Hayataki. We also have now, because many of the comets are named or found by observatories and computers, they're named after the observatories, such as Sliding Spring. That's one that finds a lot of comets. If you're looking for this in the sky, it's not likely that you would be able to find it with naked eye. With binoculars, you could find it, but it's not going to look like this. The problem when you see comet pictures is they are long exposure images. Your eye can't process a thing for a lengthy period of time. Your eye absorbs photons of light, and within 30 seconds or 30th of a second, it recycles that and puts a new photon in its place. So what we would see looking up with binoculars or a telescope would be a white cloudy object in the sky. It wouldn't be pinpoint like these stars. It would be cloudy, and that it would look round and cloudy. And that's what you would see as a comet unless you took a long exposure photograph of it. Okay, all right, now, where am I here? You can look at the California Nebula. California Nebula is nice to look at. It's kind of, it shows a lot of nebulosity, and there's areas here that are darker, and those darker areas are where those stars are going to start to form. Now, over here, kind of at the edge over here, this is called a double cluster. This is also something that's easy to find with binoculars. And I'm going to center that and close in on it. These are just 2, they're called double clusters because they're next to each other. and they're collections of groups of stars. In a binoculars, you're going to see dozens of stars in each area. With a telescope, you would see many more than that. Oh, I can do heart and soul. Who remembers heart and soul? Okay. Here we got the heart and soul nebulas, and they're just pretty to look at in the sky. You can see a lot of his star forming regions over here. And wherever it's bright in those star forming regions, that's where ultraviolet light is reflecting off the gas and dust. Over here, they seem to have ignited the stars so that there's kind of a bubble of gas being blown away. Back down here, Cassiopeia. This is the, as I mentioned, a W or M-shaped constellation. Over here is, the story goes, this is the Cepheus. It looks like a kind of like a house with a pointed roof. And Cepheus was a king, and Cassiopeia was his wife, and their daughter was Andromeda. Now, I'm not going to go into the story, but what I do have to do now is I'm going to change the time, because at 9:30 at night, Cassiopeia, Andromeda has already set. So I'm going to change that to 6:30 at night so we can bring Andromeda back. And see, the sun hasn't even set yet. So over here is Andromeda. And this is actually a naked eye object that you can see. It's clearly visible with binoculars, and with a telescope, it's also visible. What you would see is cloudiness. You're not going to see, unless you've got an enormous telescope, you're not going to see the galaxy in this shape. But you would see a cloudiness area here. You'd look up in the sky where it's completely dark, and there would be this white cloud in the sky, and that would be the Andromeda Galaxy. Andromeda has two satellite galaxies, M32 and M110, that orbit around it, and sometimes dwarf galaxies go, or satellite galaxies actually go through the main galaxy. When that happens, oftentimes they lose stars, gas, and dust, much like what's happened with the Whirlpool Nebula. So that's the Andromeda Galaxy that you actually can see naked eye from here. I've done it. Now I'm going to go back to our original time here. And we're back over by the Big Dipper. Now, before we, some of the nebula that we did see, those are areas that, those are areas where stars are actually being formed. I'm going to change the time again and to early morning so that I can show you this nebula. This is the Ring Nebula. It's in the constellation Lyra, and it's a summer constellation. It's coming up, and we'll be able to spot it in the sky. We won't be able to see the nebula itself, but we'll be able to see the constellation Lyra where it is. Now I'm going to center that and bring it in. The Ring Nebula is a different type of nebula. This is a planetary nebula. It's not a planet, but people years and years ago, without the benefit of the telescopes that we currently have, would see something like this, and it was big, and it was circular, and it was not a star. So they didn't know quite what it was. The only thing that was big and round were planets. So they called it a planet, but they saw that it wasn't really a planet, so they called it a planetary nebula. So this is the Ring Nebula. This nebula is formed when a star about the size of our sun explodes in a nova. What happens is the gas and dust explode out, and that's what you see here with the red and white and green around it. And it explodes out in a kind of circular fashion. And I'll show you, this is a front view looking straight down into it. And the center here, what's left, is this white dwarf star. This is a cinder or an amber of what's left after a star about the size of our sun explodes. Okay, it's very small and it's very hot, but it's not producing nuclear fusion anymore. It's just hot and it's got to burn it's got to cool itself off, which will probably take 1 trillion years. Okay, so this is looking straight down into it, and I'll show you another planetary nebula, cat's eye. Well, let's go back to 9:30. And look out. And let me see if I can find it. This is the, here we go. That's it. Okay, a little dumbbell. That's it. We can do that. And little dumbbell nebula. And here, this is a side view of the same type of thing, where we're looking down into it this way before. Now we're looking at the side view. So there's a big lobe over here, and there's a big lobe over here, and a small patch in the center. This is a very bad picture, okay? But that's what it would look like side to side. It would look like a dumbbell, a big lobe over this side, a big lobe over this side, and a narrow slit in the center. When we looked at the Ring Nebula, or there's another one called the Helix Nebula, circulates on the internet sometimes as the eye of God. It's really not his eye. It's a planetary nebula. But if you were looking straight through, you would see that white dwarf star in the center here. All right, so those are what planetary nebula look like. And I wanted to also show you the Owl Nebula. Now, they call it the Owl Nebula. It is called that. I'm younger than all of those. I call it the ET Nebula because when I look at it, I see ET's eyes, his long arms over here and over there, and then his little body over here. So it could be an owl, it could be ET, but that's what I call it. That's NGC 457, if anybody's keeping score. The Pacman Nebula. It just is a nebula with a lot of darkness in the middle where it looks like Pac-Man is starting to eat. So that's what that is. Oops. There we go. And go back out here. All right, and there we go. We're about, that's about an hour. I gave out some information about observing and things like that. Some of the, I could go over that if you'd like. I think that the tour of the Hershey's Mill Night Sky is pretty much concluded for now. Sky Maps was that handout that I gave you for that. They do that every month so that you can see what the night sky looks like every month. It's kind of, let me pick one up here. So you can, the evening sky map, this thing. The way to use this, it's a little bit tricky. You point, if you're facing south, you put south right in front of you and you hold it up over your head. You can't see it this way. If you're looking down at it, the sky is all backwards. You have to look up and hold it up above your head to see and point it at the direction that it says on the bottom, whatever it is. Some of these, we have a very good astronomy club nearby. It meets at, when we meet, it meets at the Westchester University Science Center. It's called the Chester County Astronomical Society. They have a website. They have meetings every month online now. We also have star parties that are open to the public. I'm a member of it. I'm actually going to give a talk there on Tuesday, or not there. I'm going to do it right here. So that's our local astronomy club. People sometimes ask about advice about telescopes, and anybody who really has an idea of what's going on tells people the main thing to do is to go to star parties, ask questions, use the telescopes, the astronomers there, never hog their scopes. They are very, very happy to let people look through them and see what their scope can do and point out things in the sky to you. Smartphone apps, I wrote down on the bottom. One of the ones that I use quite often is Skyview. And what that does is it lets you see what's in the sky. It just, I don't know if you can see it, but it as you move through the sky, it'll show you the different constellations and the planets and where they are and things like that. And if you look down, it'll show you what's below the earth. It'll show you everything that's up there, and it'll identify the objects. If you see a bright object in the sky, you just point this up at it and it'll identify what that object is for you. And I think there's a free version of it, but I think mine costs about $5. I'm not sure. There's another one that I have written down, handwritten down. It says Go Sat Watch. And I use that to find the International Space Station. It gives you times and directions about where it is in the sky and when it goes over. And you can see that anytime, naked eye, that it's going over. Another one that I use is Moon Atlas. And Moon Atlas gives you a whole picture of what the moon looks like. It identifies the different, whoops.
Yeah, I took you off of screen sharing because I thought you were just showing.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. That's fine. But the moon atlas will show you the different areas of the moon. It identifies where things are on the moon. When I'm observing, I do like to see the moon. The moon and Saturn are probably two of my favorite targets when I'm out observing. If you do go out observing, I really have 3 things that are important. Number 1, always take a flashlight, bring your phone, and bring another person with you. Okay, those are 3 important things to do. Even if you're just going out with binoculars or you're just going out naked eye observing, it's a good idea if you're going away from home or away from your house to have those items with you. Okay. Does anyone have questions?
Would you just comment, just for everybody's benefit, the moons of Jupiter and double stars that are binocular friendly?
Yeah, the moons of Jupiter. Well, Jupiter will be back another couple of months, 2 months or so. It'll be back, and you can see the 4 main moons of Jupiter: Io, Ganymede, Callisto, and Europa. Quite easily in the sky. You can also see Saturn's moon. Saturn will be coming along after a little bit after that, but you can see Saturn's moons too with a reasonably good binoculars or certainly a small telescope. And what else was it?
Double stars.
Double stars. Okay, in the handle of the Big Dipper. Let me get back to that if I can. In the handle of the Big Dipper, the middle here, right here. Let me center that and. Okay, this is the double star here, and Native Americans used to take the young boys out and ask them to count the number of stars in that constellation. And if they said 8, they saw that star, or unless they couldn't count, but that would be a double star. If they saw the 8th star, then they would count them as hunters. Otherwise, they would be farmers. So it was a little trick that they used.
And to see.
Yeah, a little sexist, but anyhow, the North Star actually is a variable double star. Whoops, I just center it. So double stars are all over the place. Most, there's that little guy over there in the corner there for us, down here. So let's see, I can bring them back a little bit. Okay, the closer you get, the further away they go. But yeah, there are a lot of double stars. I could pull up double stars on here separately using this program, but let's see if I can bring up some more of them. And but they are all over the place. In one of the summer constellations, it's the constellation Cygnus, the Swan. In the head of the Swan is a star called Alberio, and one of the stars, it's a double star. One is a bluish star, and the other is a kind of an orange star. So it's a very unusual combination in the sky, but that's in Cygnus the Swan. Okay.
Dennis, excuse me. Hi, I'm Betsy Natal, and this is my husband, Tony. I just wanted to thank you for a terrific presentation. We really enjoyed it. But we are wondering, what's the best place within Hershey's Mill to skywatch? Where do you think are the best
I
views?
told you I wouldn't be able to go there anymore. I'll tell you, I have looked at many different places. Out in front of my house, I have trees that are 30 feet high, and I mean, you can't get rid of the trees, but you gotta wiggle your telescope around here and there. I found that the lower area by the Sullivan House parking lot, the lower parking lot, gives you a good view of the south and east. And the south is where the planets come. So all of the planets will be in the south, and if they're in the east, that's when they're starting to rise up. So you'd have a good chance to see planetary things over there. Also, that's where the moon would be. and you would be restricted to some extent that you couldn't see everything that I've showed you, but primarily you would have a very good view of that.
Okay.
Another area that is not as good would, and I only say that because of the lights. Down that lower parking lot, there is a light, but you could get away with that because you're looking a different way. But down by the parking lot by the pool, if we were able to get those lights turned off, and I have not been able to get that done, that would be a good place to gather and put together a star party. Okay, there are other areas too that are, let's say, if people found you going there, they would not be pleased. Okay, so I'm not going to let you know about those.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I've found one place to go is the 8th fairway between Eaton and Franklin on the cart path.
Yes. Yeah.
That's a good east-west, and yes, security has been called, and I've explained what I'm doing, and they were fine with it.
Yeah. The problem is getting the telescope to that area. For me, anyway, I live on the 8th hole, so I have to carry my telescope across to do that. That's why it's less helpful to me. But yeah, that's a good place. I've been out there. I actually put, like, during meteor showers and things like that, I bring a chair with me and I go out and sit up with binoculars and things. So yeah, I do that. Okay.
And Upton has a question. You have to mute yourself if you do. No question? Okay. Looks like your hand is raised.
Okay. All right.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Very
Very
impressive.
interesting.
Thank you,
All
Dennis.
right. Well,
Very nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
all right.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Dennis.
Thank you.
Very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
very
Dennis.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.